So I'm completely overwhelmed because I've been working with, I don't know, half of you guys in the audience for about 2.5 years, 3 years on the book, When Women Rule the World, other things, Nat Geo Live, and just today, because I took a red eye in last night, I'll tell you why in a bit when I get to the section on parenting. But I show up and everyone's like, oh, Kara. I'm like, who the hell are you? Who are you? And another new person is introducing themselves to me every 5 minutes. And then I see the people that I've been editing the book with finally, oh my God, hi, Hillary, hi, Lisa. I mean, you know, finally I get to see these people. And it's overwhelming because of the amount of people in this room, in these rooms, whom I know. And this is a good problem to have, but please excuse my discombobulation as I work through all of this material. So let's see how we do with women in power and coffin reuse, because you did hear that I'm an expert on coffins, right? Which is a little weird, and Christian knows that I could stand in front of a coffin and go, 19th and a half dynasty, 21st and a half dynasty. It's not a good skill to have, but it is a skill. And yes, but if you were an ancient Egyptian, go back in time, use your time machine, and pretend that you have come from a time period when things are prosperous, and you're entering into a time period when things are very, very scarce. And all of a sudden, you who believe that you need the materiality of the coffin to revivify and transform your dead loved ones have no access to that wood, to that material, and you need to find a way to get it. So you're looking around, you're maybe somebody precious to you, maybe your own mother has just died, you're like, what do we do, Dad, what do we do? And you sit down and you say, well, I can't get wood, the trade routes are closed, the wars are starting, the Libyans are doing their raids, what do we do? And you think, well, we have our family burial chamber, we could go in there, you start moving things around. These are big nesting coffins, like Russian nesting dolls, one inside another, inside another. Move them around, you get to the back of the burial chamber that you own, and you say, do you know who that is? And you read the name, you're like, I don't know. I don't know who great Aunt Bertha is, I have no idea, I don't know. And so you think, okay, well, we could reuse this for Mom. Who would notice? It'll be fine. And you start to take off the lid of the outer coffin, and then the second coffin, and then the mummy board, and you take the juicy mummy center out. I know. But you take that mummy out. This is the question everyone asks me the most. They're like, but what happens to the mummy when the coffin is reused? Well, this is why archaeologists find so many tombs that are full of mummies that are coffinless. The families put them respectfully over to the side. They have been transformed. They have entered the other world. Put them over to the side. I guarantee you they brought some magicians or priests in too, to make sure that the angry dead wouldn't come and haunt them for forever. And there are texts about this as well. But then you take the juicy mummy centers out, you take the coffin set and you pull it out of the burial chamber and you bring it to a craft workshop of some kind. And you're like, well, you know, we're like, we couldn't get a coffin or wood, but we have this. And they're like, oh no, everyone's doing it, it's fine. We got it. You're like the 15th person to come along and do this. We've been doing this for some time. You're like, oh, okay, so you can just, we're like, we'll update it, like your kitchen or your bathroom. It's gonna be fine, it's gonna be good. And so they update it, and they make it palatable, they make it invisible, they make it something that people can't even see, and the coffin goes by in the cortege, and you're like, yeah, we did that. And people don't even know that you cheated the system in a way. But it helps me to understand that the ancient Egyptians do not give up their ways easily. And they continued the same religion, the same language, the same cultural systems, the same government systems for over 3,000 years. And that is a considerable thing. That'll be part of the topic today. But first, we come to women. And the reason I go from one to the other is because the work that I was just telling you about, as Christian was just saying, is the work that has taken me over a decade. I still haven't published my book on it yet. I'm working on it. I swear I'm working on it. This summer, this is my pinky swear to all of you. I will write the prose for this book this summer, because if I don't know what's going to happen. It will be called Recycling for Death. It's very exciting. So this work is very academic, very spreadsheet driven. I got to cross all my T's, I got to dot all my I's, I got to make sure I'm doing it right. This work is like a breath of fresh air. It's a release. It's like, oh, but let's think about the ancient world. This work is like what the grad student is before they go to grad school. Do we understand what I'm saying? You go to grad school and they just beat that out of you. They're like, stop being romantic about this. You cannot use your time machine. No, no, no. This is me making the past relevant. This is me connecting the ancient world to the modern world. This is me seeing humans from 5,000 years ago. And I love making these connections. And this is the twisted and weird part of me that my parents still cannot figure out, about why I see the world around me better through the lens of the ancient peoples. I don't know why that is, but it is. And it's the case for women as well. So we come to this idea of women in power. Now we feel a gravity in the room, right? #MeToo, and we're all like, okay. This is something that everybody is talking about. Where are the women? How are we to move forward as a species, as a society? What does all of this mean? And what can Egypt, ancient Egypt, of all places in the world, teach us about this subject, if anything? Well, it's an interesting thing because I've been teaching a class at UCLA called Women in Power in the Ancient World, and I've been teaching this class for about 6 years. And it's helped me to see that women rule differently, or if that's too much for you guys, because that's still quite debatable amongst many audiences that I speak to, that women are perceived to rule differently, or that the ancient Egyptians thought women ruled differently. But I want you to go into this extravaganza, this discussion, trying to ask yourselves, well, why are we so hostile to females in power? Why do we have such a problem with it? And I'm not talking about Americans, I'm talking about human beings in general. And if that is the case, what do the ancient Egyptians potentially have to teach us? So when I'm doing this talk normally, I set this into the context of government, and I do a whole rigmarole about how women have no power today. I'm going to skip that. You guys can all Google yourselves. I'm going to tell you that I separate power up into 4 types when I'm working with my graduate students and in my own scholarly work: ideological, economic, military, and political. Looking at the political here and leaders of state, we see that females have very few opportunities and very few have occupied the position as leader of state at the top of the political spectrum. If we look at things in a more parliamentary or congressional way, they're not going to go beyond 26, 27%, and that's for a minority of countries around the globe. If we think of this religiously, if any of you grew up, as I did, Judeo-Christian, Islamic, Muslim, Mormon, because they all go to, oh, I put Islamic and Muslim together, but you see my point, the Abrahamic faiths, then you know from your scriptures that women are barred from places of power. Economics, how many CEOs percentage-wise? Anyone want to shout something out? 6. It used to be 4 when I started doing this talk, and it's gone to 6. So, but that's only the United States. Worldwide, I think it's at like 3 or 4. But anyway, so when we look at the situation for women in the world today, it is quite grim. And I do this to prove to you that no, we haven't had the year of the woman and we're all done and let's take a breath and now we move forward. This is me being cynical in front of you. This is me trying to tell you that this is the reality. I know it's last Congress, and you guys can tell. You're like, I see Paul Ryan. No, you have to update this, and you would be right. But the reality is that in our government and in governments around the globe, we trust men more than women. And that the possibility of lies from a female candidate is 1,000,000 times more powerful than the absolute truth of untruths by a male candidate. And this is interesting to me. This is why I teach this class, Women in Power in the Ancient World. This is what I'm trying to figure out. What is it about women in power that we have such a problem with? And I'm not here to teach a revisionist history. I'm not here to present the past as, look, there are women in the ancient world too, and now we can all feel good about it and move on. I'm here to ask why we are opposed to it, what obstacles are put in place against the female, and what we can do to transcend those obstacles potentially. So let's think of one obstacle. I told you he would come back, right? This is the reason for the red eye. The reason I had to do the red eye is because my son had a talent show. And the talent show involved his drums. I could show you the video. He did so well. I'm so proud. So proud. But I had to get the drum set from the house to the school, and then after he was done, and he did a great job, I'm so proud, I then had to jump up on stage, commando, and then pull the drums from the carpet like this, but smaller, and move it off stage. And if I had missed that, I would have just died. I would have just died. So I had to be there for that and then take the red eye and be here for you guys tonight. This kid has made me more vulnerable than I can possibly explain to you, or maybe some of you in the audience know exactly what I'm talking about. I got postpartum everything with this kid. Postpartum anxiety, postpartum depression, postpartum hostility. I went through a divorce not long after this. This is a very good reason why women might opt out of positions of power, or might find that they have a hard time finding their way into positions of power, choosing it outright. For me, if UCLA, my employer, hadn't allowed me to go a little bit crazy and cracked, and then allowed me to come back into my place of work, I don't know how I would have dealt with this situation. I breastfed this kid for almost 2 years, and I remember the day that I stopped breastfeeding him for medical reasons, and he punched me in the face that morning. And we're sitting on the kitchen floor, and I'm crying, and he's crying, and I'm like, have some more ice cream, and we're crying. And we go through the day, and it was a horrible day. And I remember, and the reason I'm telling you this, you're like, this is a little personal, I don't know. But the reason I am telling you is because in that one day, I saw my own hormones change in a way that stunned me. Because I was able to see myself go from hyper-emotional and hyper-triggered to something that was much chiller, much calmer, much more able to deal with things. By the time I had put that kid to bed, I was watching documentaries on TV like the days of old. And I watched Hitler's Children and a documentary about a North Korean gulag, and I was like, I am back. This is great. And so I am just here to give a little personal example of what a child can do to a person. And I have one kid. I'm not some agriculturalist having a kid every year that's going to destroy me. We'll get to that. We'll get to that. And isn't he sweet? I'm so proud. I'm really proud. So have women ever ruled the world? I like to bring up hunter-gatherer realities in my class at UCLA. This is very useful because they're often brought up by historians in a revisionist historian way to say, oh, back in the hunter-gatherer days, women had all of this power. It was so awesome. It was so great. And we have since rewritten this, we historians and specialists of prehistory, and said, well, no, not quite so fast. Okay, let's take the good parts. Yes, women do get to have babies every 4 years, not every year as an agriculturalist might. And yes, they do get to, on the whole, and there are a gradient of different hunter-gatherer societies, all different kinds, but they do on the whole get to choose their partners, break up with their partners. There is no institution of marriage. There's nothing locking you into anything sexually. There is no sexual morality the way we understand it. There's also very little child sexual abuse as well in communities like this, though that could be debated for those of you that study hunter-gatherers. This is a place where women were able to control their own bodies and were able to control their own sexuality. Now, there's not a whole hell of a lot of power, though, because everyone's dying at like 25 or 30 years of age. And they're not hoarding a lot of wealth. They're not building great cities. These are hunter-gatherers moving from place to place. So this is a different kind of reality. And it's more complicated than that, because when we look at actual hunter-gatherer economics, and we think, okay, let's try to break it down. Let's study it and see who's represented on the council. Let's see who's bringing in calories. Let's see where power comes from. Let's try to understand this. There's a wonderful anthropologist by the name of Ernestine Friedel who did a study looking at this gradient, this rich gradient of hunter-gatherer cultures. And she said, oh, if you look at the Inuit of the Pacific Northwest, women bring in no resources at all, not even scarce resources. They can't go on the boat for the 2-week or 2-month fishing expedition for seals if they're breastfeeding or pregnant or anything associating with their femininity. They have to stay back. The men bring in all of the resources, and those women are bought and sold, treated like slaves. They have to do all the work. When they come back with a large mammal, they're the ones that process the blubber, that deal with all of the skin treatment and processing. They build the homes. I mean, they're doing everything. Compare that to the Tongva, the Native Americans where I live now in Los Angeles. There, people are spear fishing into rivers that are non-existent in Los Angeles now because, you know, we humans, we just suck it all up and destroy it. But I'm so sorry. Move on. Skip. Erase. We go on. Okay. So they're spear fishing by the river, women next to men. And the women are able to do, whether they've got a papoose on their back or they're breastfeeding in front or they're pregnant or menstruating or whatever crazy female thing is going through their body, they're able to bring in just about the equal resources as the guys. And if you look at their elders council, they have almost equal representation. So then we come back to this idea, well, it's about the economics, it's about the money, it's about something else. It's more complicated. Well, I could tell you something even more horrific. If we go to New Guinea, and we look at the hunter-gatherers there, you see that women are bringing in 80% of the resources. They're bringing in all of the wild grain and all of the berries. And the men are bringing in 20% of wild boar every now and then. And the women are like, 80%, come on, look at us. And everyone's like, you know what, I am so sick of gruel and berries, I'm gonna kill myself. Where is the bacon? Anyone have bacon? And the guys come back with the wild boar, and everyone's freaking out. They're sick of the gruel and the berries. Yes, it's 80% of their calories, but it is not scarce. Whereas the scarce resource, they're going to be looking towards the pork, towards the wild boar. And the men run it in Papua New Guinea. They have a better representation on the Elders Council. They have more power. They're the ones that are bringing in the resources. So it's not quite as easily understood as you might think, and it gets even more complicated as we move into farming communities. It certainly gets worse for the woman, as I'm sure you've already premeditated as I'm discussing this. In a farming community, make sure you have enough labor to work your farm. You need to now have a child every year. In order to have enough labor to protect your farm, you need to have a child every year. To live where you're going to live, you now need to potentially make clothing. So you have a child every year, you're making clothing. You're not moving around from place to place anymore either. Did I mention that? You're now settled in one place. So the hunter-gatherer way of, oh, there's gross poop and it's disgusting, let's go, is not going to work for you anymore. You're like, oh, it's gross and disgusting. Who's gonna clean it up? And so it's like, oh, where's the woman? She's gonna come and clean it up. So you now have to keep this domestic space clean. You're making clothes, you're having babies every year. Now, all of the scarce resources are coming from the outside, from the men. It could be maize if you're in the New World. It could be rice if you're in the Asian world. It could be wheat and barley if you're in the European or Middle Eastern world. But the women are the ones who are processing that. They're working on all of that, making it into bread, doing all of that labor. So imagine, they tell you that women can multitask better than men, right? So she's processing, she's watching the kids, she's sewing, she's doing some weaving on the side, and she's keeping the vermin at bay. It's a lot to do. And she's stuck in four walls, like my carpet here, right? It's my little carpet home. I can't go out. I can't politic. I'm stuck. I can't go anywhere. The guy's out there farming, connecting with other people, making political connections. I can't do anything. I'm just barely trying to keep everybody alive and clean and healthy, because epidemics are now part of this world as well. So the plight of the female gets ridiculously bad with farming. Other things come along with farming as well. I will get to Egypt. You wait. It will happen. There are people going, wait a minute, I don't understand. Okay. Hunter-gatherers don't beat their children by and large. There are some that do on this wide and rich gradient, but this is a new invention of humanity, to make people milk the cows at 4:30 in the morning, to make them go and thresh all of the wheat during harvest time when you got to be working for 20 hours a day. Anyone have a 4 or 5-year-old at home? I got the almost 9-year-old at home. You want to get that kid doing hard labor for 10 hours? How else are you going to get them to do it? You will beat them. It's horrible. But this is what I'm trying to impart to all of you as we laugh uncomfortably, is that this is very new. This is a new human thing. This is something that we ourselves have invented to support this very new agricultural revolution that is barely 10,000 years old. So this comes along with it: control of the women, control of the children, the beating, the corporal punishment, the control of the female is all a part of this. And we have many ways to deal with this. There's many ways under the sun. We talk about them in the media. We talk about the female genital mutilation. We talk about the veiling. We talk about the asymmetrical relationships, a young female with an older man. We talk about the polygamy. That top right example is from the United States, lest we think this happens in countries that are not our own. We talk about the control of the female, and yet our patriarchy does not necessarily step in and fix the agricultural or patriarchal economic system for us. Systems don't just change on their own. These are things that have to slowly economically change and lumber on over time. But this is the situation that Egypt is dealing with, and to add to that, see, I put in Egypt, did you hear that? It's coming, it's coming, it's gonna be okay. We have one more slide and it's gonna be all right. The invention of sexual morality, the invention of the institution of marriage, the invention of the good and obedient girl. I grew up with that. Be a good girl, just be a good girl. I see my son, oh, so rambunctious. I just gave him a lecture on masculine entitlement. I'm like, who in your class speaks more and messes with your teacher more? He's like, well, the boys. I'm like, okay, so can you try to give the girls a break? He's like, okay, Mom, I'll try. So, poor kid, I know. We'll laugh about it over drinks later, but not yet. So we come to it at last, women in power in ancient Egypt. And how are we to understand this hunter-gatherer past that we humans are created with? That is our evolutionary biology. And this agricultural reality that we've only lived with for the last 10,000 years at most. And now we move into Egypt, and I want to get back into the women in power and understand why some places in the world might have done it differently, and certainly have done it differently than we do, and do it differently than other parts of the ancient world, because Egypt is strange. It is bizarre and cracked. And people who devote their lives to studying ancient Egypt, crazy people like Christian Greco over there in the corner, they know that Egypt is this bizarre and weird place that we just have to try to figure out. We can't stop trying to figure out. And this bizarre and strange place allowed women into power more regularly, more systematically than anywhere else on the planet. Anywhere. Why is that? And I will show you a map. You're like, come on, give me the answer. Well, the answer's in the map. I love maps. I love geography, and I like embedding human beings into their place on this earth. And Egypt is in a very special, special place. It is protected on all four sides. You can see that from the map, right? Mediterranean to the sea to the north. It's hard to do a naval invasion. In the south, you have all these granite boulders as big as my carpet, blocking the river so that if you had an invading army coming in, you'd have to take your boats out, put them on the banks, walk them around, put them back into the river. East and west, you can see the deserts. I don't have to point that out for you. This is a place that doesn't suffer too many foreign invasions for most of its history. For most of its history, it can maintain the same religion, the same language, the same governmental system, and that's why Egypt is this extraordinary gift. Because I can study a place where human beings go through ups and downs, prosperity and failure, and see the human reactions to all of it over a very long period of time. We talk about climate change all the time. We talk about what we're going to do, what will people do? Well, I'm studying that. I study the Bronze Age collapse. I look at what people do when everything goes horribly wrong, when the governments themselves collapse, when people are raiding other villages because they're trying to feed their own children at home, when mercenary soldiers are on the move, when migrations are happening in the tens of thousands. Sound familiar? So all of these things have happened before. We can use Egypt to help us understand them again. We can also use Egypt to help us understand why some places are different from other places. So Egypt, to this day, is risk averse. It likes to keep the status quo. It likes to keep the same system going. Don't rock the boat. Can we not, warlord, please? Let's not mess with this. If you don't have all of this foreign invasion, you can keep the same system going for so long, then you can maintain a status quo in which you develop this. You develop a government in which father to son to grandson rule can function, and can function so easily that you think of it as God-given. You try to pull this off in other places in the world, like Syria, Mesopotamia, Greece, or Rome, and people are going to laugh in your face. They're like divine kingship, whatever. Put the king on the throne, and then the warlording begins, and he's dead in 10 years, maybe less. And they would be right. And there's changes in language, changes in ethnicities, there's all kinds of competition. It's a dog-eat-dog world, but not in Egypt. In Egypt, you have this cooperation, this agreement amongst all the peoples that we have enough with the River Nile. The River Nile keeps us fat and healthy. We don't even have to work too hard to get it. We don't have too many invasions. Everything's going the way we need it to go. So that if a king dies early and he leaves an 8 or a 9-year-old on the throne, they crown him. They're like, oh my goodness, you're our new king. We bow down before you. Please take the throne. In another part of the world, like Mesopotamia or Greece or Rome, that kid would be dead before the week was out. And some guy holding the bloody knife would be like, I'm the ruler now. And everyone would be like, yep, you are. That is awesome. That's great. And in Egypt, they're like, no, no. This is our divine Horus. This is the falcon god come down to our earth. This is the way it needs to be. This is the way it is God-given. And everyone gets in line. And they let this child come in, sit on the throne. They coronate him. They go through all of the ritual processes in Memphis, in Heliopolis, in Thebes, everywhere. Showing all of the elites who is king. Are you going to let that 9-year-old rule? Make the decisions? Anyone here? I have the 9-year-old, so I'm going to say no. You do not let the 9-year-old rule. Don't do it. So the Egyptians know this, so they think we need to get somebody else to rule in this kid's place. We need to let the kid grow into his kingship. Who better than a woman? The Egyptians had their finger on a human pulse point, and they knew that women rule differently. And we ourselves know this. So what's the other option? You take the brother of the dead king, and you say, okay, let the uncle rule instead. We're going to do that. Well, what's the uncle possibly going to do? Kill the kid, take the kingship for himself. I don't even have to say it. You're like all yelling it out in the audience. And this is why we all know, though some men are more feminine in their outlook and style of being emotionally, and some women are more masculine, and there is a gradient. I'll talk about that later too. But on the whole, it's the men in our society that commit the violent crimes, that commit rape, that fill our penitentiaries. The Egyptians knew this, and we know this. The Egyptians are not interested in the competition. They're not like Greece and Rome and Mesopotamia, like, get a strong man. They're like, whoa, 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 divine king and all that, Horus, falcon, keep it together. Let's get the kid's mother. He's going to keep him safe. And everyone's like, that is a great idea. We're going to do that. And we're going to do that again and again and again. And that is why everything that I'm telling you about, and this is the most depressing part of the story, is to keep an authoritarian regime safe. I told you I'm not here to write revisionist history. I'm not here to make it all happy and cuddly and rainbows and yay, women ruled. I want to too, but I can't. This is telling you that female power rears its head in the most unequal of societies to support the most unequal of patriarchal dynasties, and that the females serve as mere placeholders to keep that patriarchal system going. That's the reality. In the more broadly construed, maybe democratia systems like Greece or oligarchic systems like Rome, if one man falls, another man is going to take his place, and women have no shot at power. But in Egypt, man falls, child takes his place, and they're like, well, what are we going to do? Put the woman in charge. Yes. And sometimes, just sometimes, that woman can become king herself. And that's where I'm going to focus today. There are dozens of women who serve as regent. Most of them are not mentioned in my book, When Women Rule the World, but they're there. Some of them, about 5 to be precise, served as nothing less than king. And there are people in the audience going, I don't understand why she uses the word king. It's very annoying to me. Why doesn't she say queen? Well, I don't say the word queen because the ancient Egyptians themselves didn't say the word queen. The English language is flexible enough that it connotes rule either way, queen or king. But in ancient Egyptian, if a female rose to the highest position of political power in the land, they called her king. And so I will call her king as well. I'm going to qualify that with female king, but I will still call her king. So who are our female rulers in the ancient world? Well, we have 6, as I have laid out here. Only 5 of them reach the highest level as leader of state. That would be our first. One of these I'm going to skip over very quickly because her story is too complicated in Game of Thrones and we cannot handle it. You'll know when it happens. I'll be like, and we're moving on. But you can guess which one it is. We have no time. But let's start with Merneith. Dynasty 1. I think you get the idea that as soon as kingship coalesces in Egypt, female power comes along with it. The two are sides of the same coin. You cannot have one without the other. They both belong together. Merneith's history is extraordinarily difficult to tell because this is 5,000 years ago. I can't just tell you, well, Merneith thought this, and then she wrote down in her diary, and then this happened. Don't forget, too, that we are studying an authoritarian regime. Authoritarian regimes keep it close to the vest. They don't reveal things. There's no competition that reveals things for rulers against their will. In our own political system, we have no problems with revealing people's tax information, talking about lovers, investigations, all kinds of things. Christian Greco from Italy knows it's no different, right? So the more competitive the political system, the more we know about all of the leaders. We know who's sleeping with whom. We know what their sexual interests are. We know all kinds of things. But in Egypt, we know nothing. And it is up to us as historians to pull those veils aside. This is what I think of when other Egyptologists say, you know what, you're just making stuff up. You're just becoming too fanciful. Can you really say that? I'm like, I have to think this way. Because they are idealizing and perfecting everything. And if I don't try to think one step beyond and try to figure out what their realpolitik is, then what am I doing? I'm just giving into their own propaganda, thinking that the aliens were building the pyramids and not the Egyptians themselves. I could go into that. I'm not going to let that settle. I'm going to move on. Okay. Now, when the Egyptologists, archaeologists, found the tomb of Merneith, they're like, oh, okay, another king's tomb. We got it. Another king's tomb. They're all in a line in this place called Abydos. And there's a tomb after tomb after tomb in a horizontal stratigraphy. And they find this one and they think, but something's a little off because the marker, the stela that was found to be placed in front of the tomb, probably as part of a pair, is missing something. It is missing the Horus bird. It's missing the falcon. And that falcon is the symbol of kingship par excellence. It's that thing that you need to show that somebody's been formally named as king. And so they're like, okay, something's a little weird. And then more excavation happens, and in the tomb of another king, they find a tiny little label, like this big. And in this label, let me see, I'll use my pointer. They find, oh, no, I won't use my pointer. Okay, oh my goodness gracious. Okay, you see the vulture? That's mother. You see the plant next to it? That's king. So they have the names of all of these kings. We have Jer, Jet, Den, and then all of a sudden you have the king's mother, Merneith. And they're like, oh, she's a regent. Remember, a regent is not a title that's formally given either. You don't want to formally give a title because then you have to formally take it back. Just let her do the work. She'll melt back into the woodwork when it's time. It'll be fine. Just let her do it. So they say, oh, okay, she is regent for her young son who came to the throne too early, probably King Den. And this is very interesting. She seems to have been buried like a king, even though she's not named as a king. I wonder what else we can learn about this story. Well, let's try to go back ourselves and understand what Merneith herself may have lived through in her own reality, how she's dealing with this power herself. She comes to being, she grows up, probably at the court of Jer. This guy may have been her father, he may not have been, but given the position and the place that she takes in her life, King Jer was probably her father. She was probably related to him. She grows up with him, things are great. Egypt is coalescing into this amazing regional state, the first regional state on the planet. The palace is luxurious, she has nice places to hang out and rest, the food is great, everything's wonderful until her father Jer dies. And then things get seriously real. Because in Dynasty 1, to show their power, these kings sacrificed hundreds and hundreds of fellow Egyptians. And I'm not talking about enemies of state. I'm not talking about people that you pulled from the border. I'm talking about people you ate at table with, people you shared a meal with, you hung out with, family members. The teeth examinations, limited though they are, and my own graduate student Rose Campbell is doing some of these examinations in Britain right now, show that these people are well-nourished. They're elite. They're killing the cream of the crop, in a sense. And for King Jer, there was a selection. And Merneith, as a child, when King Jer dies, would have seen this. She would have seen the word spread throughout the palaces of Egypt. You're going to die. You're going to die. You're going to die. You're going to die. Everyone's preparing for this. The king is being embalmed. They're processing his body. Then the day comes when they're going to start the burial proceedings. They probably start the burial proceedings at the main capital of Memphis. The necropolis is Saqqara. And they start with these killings, these sacrifices. From all we can see, people go to their death willingly. I'll show you an example in a bit. How they went to their death, we do not know. But almost 600 people went to their death to accompany Jer into the heavens, to act as his servants, his helpmates, his protectors. And Merneith, as a child, would have lost aunts, uncles, friends, companions, and she would have seen them die. In a sense, one could look at the pyramid texts, the texts that are associated with the burial of the king in archaic times, and find texts that talk about the keening, the mourning, the wailing that accompanies the death of the king. And I can only imagine if you manufacture that wailing. You create that mourning by killing people's loved ones in front of their eyes. Merneith is not slated for death. She is married to King Jet, the next king. How she's related to him, we don't know. Maybe it was her half-brother, full brother, we have no idea. But she marries this dude, and he rules for a short period of time, and then all of a sudden, he dies. He dies. Let's say that he dies after 10 years of rule and he leaves Merneith with an 8-year-old kid. And let's say that Merneith is chosen to be regent. She's not formally given this position, she's just kind of pushed into this position. The kid is crowned, she's got to protect him. And everyone's like, okay, who's going to die? Who's going to make this decision? It's Merneith. She's the one pulling the strings. She's the one that has to look out and say, you're going to die, you're going to die, you're going to die. And it's a fellow Egyptologist, Ellen Morris, who's made the conclusion that more males died for this tomb, for this king. Because why wouldn't you? You're going to be keeping the... You're Merneith, right? You want, and didn't I just tell you that women rule differently than men? Didn't I just tell you that? But not when they're placeholders for the patriarchy. Not when they're keeping everything safe. So the next time you see a woman in power and you're like, I thought she would rule differently. Well, for whom is she ruling? What is her agenda? Merneith's agenda is to keep her boy Den safe, to keep him without any sort of problems, any threats. And you have a lot more men put to death in this tomb than in other tombs. A lot of, according to Ellen Morris, and this skeletal analysis is very badly done because it was all dug up by Petrie in like 1910 and 1920, and more work needs to be done. But from the initial skeletal analysis, it seems that many women and children died for this tomb in particular, which makes sense because they could potentially be killing Den's brothers. Can you imagine becoming king and watching all of your playmates and brothers die before your eyes? That's the price of kingship. It's a significant and steep price to pay. Each one of these individuals gets a marker of his or her own. Their gender is marked, male or female. They get a little room of his or her own in the burial space, and they look like this. How they died, we don't know. Matt Adams of Abydos, who's uncovered many of these bodies, thinks that it's cyanide, kind of like a Guyana punch, right? Jonestown sort of thing. There's no evidence of strangulation. There's no evidence of stabbing. This is a common thing. This is going to sound bad, but this is a common thing for early kingships to do. Early kingships around the planet, around the globe, commit this human sacrifice, taking people into the burial of the king with him. And they do so to manufacture their power. But in other places, like Mesopotamia, the royal death pits of Ur, these guys have pointy axe blows to the back of the head. And you're like, oh, that's how they died. But in Egypt, so typical. They just put themselves off as this super peaceful, we're so chill, we would never kind of people. So you have all of these sacrificial burials, but you have no evidence of death at all. Rather astonishing. So, Merneith herself, when she finally dies, and Den is all strong and powerful, and she's made him into the most powerful king of Dynasty 1. We have to give her some of this credit, is buried like a king herself, which is beyond extraordinary. That's the Egyptians telling us, okay, she didn't have the falcon of kingship. No, she's not a king, but we're going to bury her like a king. We're cool with that. And she is confusing archaeologists right and left as they're like, king, king, Merneith, king, king. And she even gets sacrificial victims. Not as many as they do, only 120 more or less, that's all we've found. And people have looked at this, archaeologists like, well, that's because she's a woman. And I go, really? It's because she's a woman that she doesn't get as many sacrificial victims? Or is it because she doesn't have that violent transfer of power? The king is dead, long live the king, oh my God, what are we gonna do? That moment of, how am I gonna keep my job? Is everything gonna be safe? That transfer of power is the most frightening time for any official. Her death did not bring that on. Because her death didn't bring that on, they don't have to get rid of as many threats. So a mere 120 people die for her. Her tomb looks something like this, a grand affair, no small thing. And yet, we will see this repeated. Merneith is removed from the later king list. Just 2 reigns later, she's gone. We have the same kings I mentioned. We've got Jer, Jet, Den, boom, on to the next king. No Merneith, no more regent something or other. She doesn't need to exist. She's useful in the moment. She's useful to keep the patriarchy going. We don't need her in the history books. I can talk about her now to resuscitate her, but you're not going to read about her in any Egyptian history knowledge. This is something the Egyptians themselves did, and then we replicate with time. All right, moving on. I'm spending more time with Merneith because human sacrifice, I mean, you have to, right? It's amazing. Neferu-Sobek's story is a little shorter, even less well known because we have less information for her, even though she's much more recent in time from Dynasty 12. A formidable woman, to be sure. Her story is very confusing because she comes from a time period of great wealth, excess, and power. Her grandfather was nothing less than Senwosret III, a badass king par excellence. I mean, this guy, he broke the Egyptian elites who were trying to act against him. He expanded the boundaries of the empire. He was amazing. And his son, Amenemhet III, was no different. This was Neferu-Sobek's father. So Neferu-Sobek then all of a sudden comes along and marries this guy, Amenemhet IV. There is great Egyptological disagreement about who this guy was. Is he the son of Amenemhet III? Did he just marry Neferu-Sobek to gain the throne? We're not really clear. But what we do know is that when this guy dies, all of a sudden Neferu-Sobek becomes king herself. King, the first Egyptian king. And I'll show you an image of her that's more definitively her in a bit. But how could something like this possibly happen? We're talking about a dynasty that's on the upswing. Everything is going right. Everything is going well. And then all of a sudden, a female pharaoh, because let me tell you, a female pharaoh connotes nothing more than problems, crisis, something's gone wrong. What's possibly going wrong here? I don't know this, and an authoritarian regime isn't going to tell me this. They're not going to write in our dynasty, too much incest today. But I'm going to guess that Egypt, given what we know about the incest that they were committing in the royal family to keep the power close and inside, is marrying brother to sister with a regularity that will create sterility. And why else would there be no male heir at all? Even with the system of the harem, that institution, that mighty institution, set up to make sure that we are creating as many male offspring as we possibly can. This is the best I have for now. If anyone has any other ideas for why Neferu-Sobek becomes king, please step forward. But this is something that we don't only see in Dynasty 18, as I showed with Tutankhamun, but we see in Cleopatra's Macedonian Ptolemaic dynasty. And we see in Europe as well, lest we think that we are above all of this. And I showed Charles II, the Habsburg, whose head was supposedly so large he needed a special pillow. Yeah, we could go on. That's a topic all in a, right? I will stop. I'm stopping myself because I'll just keep going. So we create the first female kingship with Neferu-Sobek. She doesn't hide the fact that she's a female. She shows that she has breasts, she wears a dress, and she layers the masculine elements on. She shows herself wearing the striped Nemi's headdress. She ties on the kilt of kingship. She is there to step into the breach, to step into the role. And Neferu-Sobek does something quite innovative and clever that tells us that she understands her place. One of the reasons that we Egyptologists have such a hard time understanding who her husband before was, that guy Amenemhet IV that I skipped over so fast, is he her brother? Is he some other dude? We don't know. Is because she ignores him utterly. She doesn't give him any monuments. She doesn't no like super gravestone. Oh, I love you, husband dear. You're gone now. No, she just is like, whatever. I don't care about that guy. Whoever he was, she ignores him. Who does she focus on? Her dad. This is very clever. Now think of today's politics and where we can see this. Think of how this works. I hear the murmurs in the crowd. Just pretend you're all anthropologists and you're not part of the American political scene right now, and then it's okay. But think about how safe it is to work with the mother or with the daughter. And Donald Trump knows this. I said his name. It's okay. We did it. We did it. So And Melania knows this too. She's like, I want nothing to do with this politics stuff. I'm done. No, 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 because she's there coming in from an equal peer level. But the mother is going to support. The daughter is going to support. They're in the lineage. This is going to work. Nefru Sobek knows this as well. She looks to the father and says, I am just doing what my father wanted. I am his lineage. I am his offspring. This is fine. This is something that in the 90s, Hillary Clinton didn't get. Because she's like, I'm going to make this healthcare thing and it's going to be great. And everyone's like, I'm sorry, you have no patriarchal lineage established anthropologically that I can see. And she's like, I'm just trying to make healthcare. And they're like, we feel threatened. We don't know why, but in our evolutionary biological senses, we feel threatened. And that's where we are today. We need to continue to talk about these things. And Nefru Sobek can teach us and tell us how. Moving on to Hatshepsut of Dynasty 18. Let's look at her pattern and see what she has to teach us. She was a king's daughter, a king's wife, a king's sister, because gross, she married her half-brother. So you think I got that incest from nowhere? No, no. I have evidence from other places. What she never became was a king's mother. She bore a daughter instead. If she had born a son to her half-brother husband, Thutmose II, we would talk about her very differently. But we do not. She had that girl, and then that's the strange twist of fate that paved her entire path. She marries that half-brother, Thutmose II, who is a weak man for all we can see from his mummy. He has this enlarged heart and all these pockmarks all over his face. And Egyptologists are quite cruel when they talk about this king. So he dies after, let's say, 3 years of reign, though there is discussion. He could have a longer reign. But 3 years of reign, and he leaves Hatshepsut with a nursery full of kids who aren't her own, and with a bunch of boys who probably are around 2 years of age. And why am I even discussing Hatshepsut at all? Well, she's the great royal wife, but Thutmose II obviously had a number of other wives in his harem. Why am I zeroing in on her? Well, she's occupying a place as the great royal wife. The great royal wife, not just of the king, but of the god Amun-Re. She is the god's wife of Amun. She is the highest priestess in the land of Egypt. And as such, she is there as a caretaker of her family dynasty. And she is there when everything goes wrong to help move things on to the next level. So when they have this passel of children to choose among, it seems they choose one of the weakest of those sons so that they can keep Hatshepsut as regent, even though she is none of those sons' mother. Does that make sense? The mothers of these kids, I'm sure there were some powerful ones among the harem children, and they could have picked one of these kids and had one of those mothers act as regent, but they're going to break the rules, the officials, the priests, the courtiers. They want Hatshepsut. They want her to keep the status quo so they can keep their jobs. So there's some sort of huddled up discussion, something happening in the palace, some backroom smoky discussion where they're like, look, we want you to rule after all of this. This is ridiculous. We can't we can't give all the power to some woman, to some other royal woman. We want you. So we need to pick a son whose mother is a complete and total loser. I don't have evidence for this. We only have one statue of Thutmose III's mother, but she doesn't seem to have been an elite and educated, formidable presence. So Hatshepsut is able to step in, rule as regent for a kid who's not her own, and then step in and slowly take more power. She is a very careful strategist. She starts to place information around Egypt that shows that she has a runway towards more power. This text in particular from Egypt South tells us that she is chosen by the sun god for the kingship. It's like it's written by a lawyer. She's not saying, I'm king, not yet. This is probably year 2 or 3 or 4 of all of this crazy time. She's saying, but I'm doing the job. The sun god chose me to do the job, right? And she's putting this text out there. Who can read a text like this? Only the elites. Only people who are educated to read text. I teach hieroglyphs at UCLA. This is no easy task. It's not something that just comes along. Exclusionary authoritarian regimes don't create alphabetic systems for a reason. They like things like this. So the elites who can read this are like, ah, that's what she's doing. Okay, I get it. And everyone else is like, da, 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 look, it's the god's wife of Amun, and they have no idea until she does this. And she becomes king in her own right in year 7 of her nephew Thutmose III. It's a very frustrating thing to talk about her kingship, and the dating of it is fraught. The Egyptologists, oh my God, they fight about this. Year 7, year 3, year 2, and the debate goes on and on. But to me, the most important question is, why the hell did she do it in the first place? Because she only tells us, my father Amun-Re asked me to do it, I needed to do it. Why is she becoming king alongside a king who's already there? At this point, the kid is 9 years old. He's no 2-year-old, he's no 4-year-old, no 5-year-old. Things are moving along. Why does she become king at this point? We don't know a lot about this, but something was going down behind the scenes. Maybe there was an entourage moving in, trying to move Hatshepsut out of position, and her entourage out of position. Or maybe Thutmose III's on his deathbed with a high malarial fever, because in Egypt, it's a question of when you get malarial fevers, not if you get them. Vaccinations, everybody. Why she decided to become king is as frustrating to me as anybody else. This authoritarian regime is not going to give it away. But what I do know is that when she becomes king, she herself knows she can never rule alone. There is a crass feminist part of me, notice how I went feminist, crass, that wants her to have taken out this kid, have him assassinated, have just one ruler, just one, who did it alone. Because Cleopatra didn't do it alone. The woman who did do it alone, like Tawastret, they're just taken out very, very quickly. Hatshepsut rules for about 22 years altogether. It's a long time, but she never rules alone. This kid is following her footsteps the whole way. She can never get rid of him, and she knows she can't. She's a clever girl, this one. She knows if she had this guy assassinated, what's going to happen to her? Move on to another king. Her placeholding days are over. That's it. She's only there to support him. This kingship is irrevocable, to be sure, but if she goes so far as to assassinate the true holder of the position or the previous holder of the position, then we are nowhere, and she is nowhere. So she knows that the only reason that she can exist over the longue durée is because of the male inhabitant of the throne. Cleopatra is no different. She rules for about 21, 22 years altogether. She also never rules alone. We will get to her, I promise, we will. Hatshepsut is a jobs creator. She keeps the money close, making sure that she has control over this strange dual reign of aunt and nephew that she has created. She has complete control of the temple. I mean, she was the highest priestess, right? So that when she has herself marked for power, she makes sure that the oracle of the god Amun-Re comes out in a public procession and finds her in the crowded space. She writes about this in her texts, saying that everyone didn't know what to do when the bark of Amun was brought out, and it seemed to be rudderless and without direction, and then all of a sudden it went this way and that way and that way, lands right in front of her, and what does she do? She throws herself to the ground, raises her arms up, and says, "What would you have me do, my father Amun?" That's ideological power. She knows that no one can dispute it. The best thing about ideological power, for those of you that have just had a dispute with anybody who believes in something beyond this realm, is that there's nothing you can say, no fact you can bring up. That's what they believe. And Hatshepsut knows that this is true power to say, the gods chose me, what are you going to do? There's nothing you can say. There's no evidence that you can point to work against her. She sends expeditions to far-off lands like the kings of old, the kings of the old kingdom. She brings back evidence of the fat chieftainess of Punt that her men met along the way. She builds structures that the world had never seen the like of before, similar to older ones, but very different in their forward-looking way. And yet she is on the back foot the whole time. She has to fit this patriarchy. She cannot make this patriarchy fit her. Let me tell you what I mean by that. She starts out, like Nefru Sobek, depicting herself as a woman and layering the kingship upon her, putting the Nemi's headdress on, but here's my dress. Yes, I'm a woman. Text shows she's a woman. And then we see that there's something going on. She's like, well, I can't have it this way. He's getting older. I need to masculinize. Something has to change. So she shows herself, it seems, with bound breasts, because there's no nipples showing. But she's topless and wearing a masculine kilt. So it's an androgynous figure, to be sure, but look at that face. Look at the gracility of the shoulders, of the heart-shaped face, even the feet and the hands. This is her most beautiful piece, this androgynous piece. Maybe the way that she wanted to be while she's trying to masculinize. And then finally she's like, oh, fine, whatever. I'll just become what you want. And most of her statuary shows her as buff and with all the pecs and biceps you can imagine, with a square jaw, the masculine king that her people need and want, or, as her nephew is growing up, that she needs to inhabit, that she is now perhaps dressing to become when she goes out into rituals in the open spaces. Hatshepsut depicts herself as the one who gives to the gods, who is the daughter of her father and the daughter of Amun-Re, the god, the one who is given the divine birthright, like Neferu-Sobek before her. And when she is buried, her nephew Thutmose III buries her with the respect she deserves from all that we can see. Yes, the tomb was robbed, but there is evidence that she was put into a sarcophagus, that she was put into a coffin, that she had all of the other paraphernalia of death, all of the figurines, all of the canopic jars, all of these things. Then, 20 to 25 years later, that same nephew whose reign she saved, whose reign she created, goes out and sends men with chisels to erase her names wherever he can find them. Sends out men with sledgehammers to smash up all of those statues that I have shown you. Each one of those statues that has been depicted here is pieced together from tiny little fragments, glued together by conservators, found in pits in the ground, smashed up and thrown away. She is removed from the archaeological record. She is removed from Egypt's history by Thutmose III. And so Hatshepsut continues to be a name that few of us can pronounce. Yeah, go ahead and try it. I'm just kidding. Now Nefertiti. I'm doing okay on time? Nefertiti is Dynasty 18, and most of you look at this, and you saw the reproduction in the exhibition tonight, I hope, and you see her as a great beauty. And the coolest thing about Nefertiti is that her story is being rewritten right now. Archaeologists are practically having intellectual fistfights over this woman. The amount of debate is so fierce, because Nefertiti may have ruled as nothing less than king herself, and we can discuss. So she starts out her reign married to this guy, Amenhotep IV, son of Amenhotep III, seems all normal and fine, and he looks all normal and fine. And yet a few years into his reign, he starts to depict himself like this. See the breasts in the corner? You can't see the hips because those are cut off from the statue. But it is an androgynous figure. He is male and female simultaneously. His face is drawn, pulled down. His eyes are these slit-like things. It's a crazy, radical depiction of the king, something that we have never seen before. And Nefertiti's face undergoes the same drastic alterations. All of these things are happening in a way that is probably freaking their people out, freaking the priests out. Everyone is like, wait, what is this? Why does he look this way? What is going on? I have my own ideas for why he depicts himself like this in the book. I don't have time. Take too long. But he is showing himself worshiping the solar disk. He is removing from the temples all of the funding that used to be given to gods like Sobek or Khnum or Ptah or Amen, and he is moving it all towards the Aten cult, this solar disk. He is saying we do not need to have the statues of the gods anymore. No more idols. We can just have the sun in the sky. I would argue that's why his eyes look like slits, because he's out there in the sun like this. You can't look at the sun with wide open eyes. This is not a place that is candlelit. You're out in the bright light. And he shows himself as if he's in the bright light. To do all of this, this crazy dude, because Egyptologists really do talk about Akhenaten in this way, what he did was beyond belief. He creates from the ground up a new capital city out in the middle of nowhere. Not at Memphis, not at Thebes, not at Heliopolis, not even at Elephantine, where no god was sacred before. And he builds palaces, temples, treasuries, everything that a new city would need. And he does it fast, probably like 8 to 9 years he does this. And Nefertiti comes with him as his great royal wife. And along the way, he changes her name to Neferuaten Nefertiti. Oh, you think that's bad? You have no idea. You just wait. It's going to get worse, and there will be an exam after this. He shows them as a happy family, all cuddling their daughters together, the king on one side, the queen on the other, same size. Her throne might even be, well, not her throne, but her crowns might even be higher than his. And they're there just in a purely naturalistic scene. Egyptologists for some generations have looked at this and seen the first monotheism. Whether that's true or not, you guys can debate, and Egyptologists certainly are. They have looked at this and they have seen a summer of 1969 love and puppies and rainbows, and it's just awesome. And what they don't see is that this happens in the context of a top-down authoritarian regime, where this king is changing things by force, by coercion. We will worship gods in this way. You will do things in that way. And he elevates two of those daughters and makes them his great royal wives. And he co-opts his elites. And we see image after image from the tombs of him and Nefertiti throwing out solid gold trinkets for the elites that are like, yes, please, over here, like a Mardi Gras sort of thing, but where you catch like $1 million. And the kind of people that are attracted to this, the kind of people that go along with a regime that's just going to grossly and blatantly pay them off, are the kind of people that would do this. Because the archaeologist and one of my other students, Ann Austin, is working in Tel El Amarna right now on this bioarchaeological material. And they are finding horrors in the graveyards of the laborers who built this city from the ground up in less than 10 years. Children separated from adults in the hundreds, buried alone and wounded and starving. Adults buried alone and wounded and starving. This is how this regime was built. It is a brutal reality, and is a reality with which we are all coming to terms, Egyptians as well. There is a great deal of debate about this, but the skeletons are there speaking their own truths, and we need to sit and listen. And through all of this, we see Nefertiti perhaps, here's where the debate and the fistfights amongst Egyptologists start, becoming co-king. Because we see a new person on the political scene, a Nefer-Neferuaten with the name Ankh-Heprure. So we have the same Nefer-Neferuaten that we had before that was appended to her name, and now we're adding a different name, an Ankh-Heprure. And the debate is lessening on this one, and I would say most Egyptologists agree that she is there as a co-king, working alongside her husband Akhenaten. It's such an interesting time of such new discoveries and such scholarly debate that it is even possible that the mask of Tutankhamun was made not for Tutankhamun, but made for Nefertiti as co-king, or whoever Ankh-Heprure was. Because underneath this, and I'm not the one who's saying this, these are Egyptologists like Dieter Arnold and Luca Bold and Nicholas Reeves, and this is published by Nicholas Reeves, who look at this and see traces of an older name underneath, and see traces of Ankh-Heprure. And I myself have stood this far from this mask and seen the same traces. So is this Tutankhamun, or was it made for Nefertiti as co-king, or whoever Ankh-Heprure was? And if it was, then why was it reused for Tutankhamun and recarved? The whole funerary set of Tutankhamun is known to be recarved. Names are replaced. You can see the old names underneath. The fact that the mask was recarved is almost an afterthought, because we already know that the outer two coffins were certainly reused. We'll leave that one there. I don't have time to talk about this one. The last thing I'm going to say is you really want the fist fight to go with the Egyptologists. You really want to see them start throwing punches. Then you say, well, was Nefertiti's sole king a Smenkhare? And then they'll go, whoa! And this is where there's a quite fierce debate. Did she then act as sole king after the death of Akhenaten? If she did, as I argue in the book, she was the one to clean up the mess. I'm going to just click after that. Just click. Oh, Game of Thrones! It happened. Tawasrat of Dynasty 19. We have no time, but she ruled for a boy who was not her own son, who happened to have a club foot and was taken out by the first king of the 20th dynasty by the name of Setnacht. We'll move on. It's so complicated. To Cleopatra. We have to end with her, right? Cleopatra never ruled alone. She also ruled for 21 to 22 years. She ruled alongside her father, Ptolemy XII. He handpicked her to rule alongside him after he executed one of her sisters, but we'll leave that aside. After his death, she is then meant to rule with her husband, brother Ptolemy XIII. They get into battle with one another, and he dies fighting against her in battle. So not a great relationship, but that's the way it was supposed to have worked. She then moves on to brother number 2, and she's supposed to have married and is married to Ptolemy the 14th. But he is assassinated by her, so we move along. But the interesting thing about all of that is Cleopatra herself knew that she could not rule alone. Even though Egypt is different now, Egypt is not safe in its protective bubble anymore. Egypt is not this place where you don't have any foreign invasions. No, Egypt is in Alexandria, perched out on the edge of the world, out there as part of the larger Mediterranean scrum of Roman civil wars and invasions. She's got to get involved in politics. This is a globalized Egypt. And within this globalized Egypt, she links herself to this great warlord, Julius Caesar. She picks well. He's the guy that is essentially creating authoritarianism in Rome for the first time and doing such a bang-up job of it that he is killed on the steps of the Senate when she's there to visit. Awkward. But she's already had his child, Caesarion, as everybody calls him, and whom she calls Ptolemy the 15th. So she has some sort of return on her investment. But she's got to look out for another Roman warlord. She needs another Roman man. And so she launches upon Mark Antony. They're better matched in terms of age. She needs him and he needs her. He needs her grain. He needs to pay his soldiers. He needs her money. She shows him all of this. When they meet in Tarsus in Anatolia, she shows up in this river barge all decked out. And according to the Roman text, this is just beyond anything you can imagine that, I don't know, imagine your most over-the-top star and the kinds of things that they do. This is that times a million. Cleopatra shows up as decadently as you can possibly think. And she is doing it for a reason. She is doing it quite systematically, quite cleverly and strategically to show Mark Antony, oh, I can fund your armies. You're having some trouble with those boys back home in Rome? You need to fight? You're having a civil war? Oh, I got that. Look at all this. Look at all this. And he's like, oh, yeah, look at all of that. So whether they actually loved each other romantically, were in love, what their emotions were, we can't trust the Roman sources on that. I mean that. I don't trust the Roman sources on anything they tell me about Cleopatra or Mark Antony's personality, thoughts, or greater ambitions. I'm just going with the system. In terms of the system, they were a very, very good match for each other because Cleopatra herself was this goddess, this paragon, not just, I mean, beauty, we debate that, right? Was she beautiful? Was she not? But she was rich in her way, even though she's ruling an Egypt that is dealing with famine and drought like it has never done before. But she still has more wealth than she necessarily needs, and she has wealth that she can spend on Roman warlords who are willing to be, in a sense, sperm donors to her. Because she doesn't marry them, and they don't marry her. She doesn't want to marry them, but she creates offspring with each of them. And she is the one that comes closest, out of any in our story, to being the man at the center of the wheel of power. Having kind of a harem in a way. I love that. She's like, I'll take you, and oh, you're dead. Okay, let's go for you. And she has children with all of these different men, and she is this killer super womb who's able to have twins and live. Who does that? Cleopatra the 7th does that. But it's all for naught, because Mark Antony does the most boneheaded thing you can possibly imagine. He invades Parthia. Anyone know where Parthia is? Anyone heard that thing about not having a land war in Asia? Parthia is modern-day Iran, more or less. You're going to invade Iran and live? He is devastated by this invasion. It goes horribly wrong. Emotionally, physically, financially. He comes back to Alexandria in absolute tatters. And so then they decide, oh, we know we were going to do, it's going to be great. We're going to do another great bid. They're not necessarily thinking right. They're on the back foot. They're defensive. They go all in on the Battle of Actium. And it goes horribly wrong. And they lose everything. Cleopatra hightails it out of that battle. She's there. And she hightails it out back to Alexandria as soon as she sees the writing on the wall. Mark Antony stays a little bit longer, but not too much longer. But guess which one the Roman propagandists go after for being a coward and leaving the situation early? I would have done the same. Go home, protect your kids, right? Losing battle. Go, go. Think like a woman. Rule like a woman. We can continue to discuss that one. Mark Antony commits suicide. Cleopatra goes back to Alexandria. She herself is said to commit suicide. Whether or not she actually does this, I would like to bring up for discussion because it works so well for the guy who won this whole thing. Octavian, Caesar Augustus, the guy who is writing all of this propaganda, the guy who is setting this story before our eyes, who is using Cleopatra as a means of taking down his Roman Civil War rivals without doing so directly, of making it Egypt's fault. Not just that, making it a woman's fault, making it a sorceress's fault. He even makes her like a witch, somebody that is working on the minds of these good Roman men, changing them from what they were, the noble and pure-hearted men that they were, turning them to these lazy, cruel men interested in authoritarian kingly power. And we believe these texts, which is why when I wrote that chapter, I threw out all of those texts. But in the end, well, let's do this first. I gave you my 6 women, though Tawasrat we skipped very, very quickly. Where else did women rule the world? I mean, I can't talk about them all, right? There's no way. Jezebel and Athaliah, mentioned in Kings and Chronicles of the Bible, each of them working on behalf of dynasties, some cases sons, both of them punished for it brutally within the patriarchal scheme. Boudica and Zenobia both fought against Rome and both lost and were remembered as martyrs against this great Roman might. The only women that can potentially compete with Egyptian women are Chinese women, women like Empress Le or Empress Wu, and it's the system of filial piety that allows them to have this kind of power. And then, of course, there are all these women of a fragmented Europe, women like Catherine the Great, Elizabeth I, and on, that we look to understand female power. And in most cases, I would argue that the success is largely ignored, that the female is largely aggrandized, that those who are successful, like Elizabeth I, often do so with no legacy or succession whatsoever, have to be essentially virgin queens who cannot take on another co-king or lover because it would adulterate their own rule so much. These women like Hatshepsut or Cleopatra, Hatshepsut being the success on the one hand, Cleopatra being the failure on the other, are remembered in our own cultural, excuse me, you can only speak this long for, I mean, my God, right? Are remembered in our own cultural memory as such. So Cleopatra, the one who does not leave Egypt better than she finds it, is remembered as this failure who commits suicide and leaves her children to their fates, to be hunted down, all but one by one, by Octavian, and destroyed. And Hatshepsut, who did everything right, left Egypt better than she found it, left Egypt to Thutmose III, her nephew and heir, stronger than it was. We can't even pronounce her name. We have no idea who she really is. Shakespeare wrote a play about one of them, not about the other. So success, think of the last meeting you had with your boss one-on-one. You had a great idea, and your boss takes that idea and brings it to the larger meeting with all of the bigwigs, and you're like, that was so my idea. They took my idea. Well, that's because it was a successful idea. Success is fungible. It is transferable. It is something that can move from one individual, one entity to another. Failure, you're like, oh no, I'm going to stay far away from that. I'm going to let Cleopatra own that. Let somebody else own that. And so we let the failure sit with the female as a cautionary tale. Okay, I'm so almost done. I'm there. So what have we learned from this whole extravaganza, from this whole thing? Do women rule differently? Can Egypt teach us anything? How are we to understand our own hostility towards female power going forward? Are we hostile to female power? What do we think about the whole thing? Okay, I'm going to leave you with one final point that will take me about 2 minutes to get through. Now, I think that this is an agricultural construct, that men are this way and women are that way. And we are remaking this before our eyes, that there are men who act more feminine and women who act more masculine, right? We're talking about transgender. We're talking about the biological realities that are not this. But this is what we live. This is our system. This is what is imposed upon us. And this, to me, is the reason that women are not allowed to rule. Right here, in a nutshell. Because they're so hormonal, because they're so mercurial, because we can't trust them, because they're just this emotionality, I just can't even. And I would like to say, okay, cognitive scientists have, on the whole, with gradients, proven that women are more in touch with their emotions, proven that they show their emotions more to others and to themselves. proven that they do have these ups and downs throughout the day. And then I would like to turn that and ask you, which in our species is so not in touch with his emotions that he might then not talk about them, think about them, exercise something in advance, kill his whole family, kill himself, commit some violent act, rape, do something, because there is no emotional connection. And that it is the very, and I would stereotype here, female act of feeling your emotions, trying something out, thinking what it would mean if I press that red button. Should I? Let me talk to some people. I'm not sure. Let's think about it. That very emotional act is potentially the only thing that can get us through the 21st century intact. Thank you very much.